we should not see artificial intelligence as something entirely new, but rather as just the latest version of something that's been going on now for a couple hundred years.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic? So is your views on the automation, the ongoing automation, is leading us to trouble?
What is disturbing about the present situation is the fetishism of the computer. The notion that somehow the computer is smarter than us, or if it isn't yet, it will be very soon. And this is silly. There's a lot of hype around AI. This is necessary in order to get money, venture capitalists to pour money in. But I think it will, like a lot of other things that have been hyped, will cool off, and we'll find it very useful, and we'll also screw up, pretending that it can do things it can't do, and life will go on.
Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Andrew Feenberg. Dr. Feenberg is a distinguished philosopher and a leading voice in the philosophy of technology. Dr. Feenberg's groundbreaking work explores the profound impact of technology on society, blending insights from critical theory with a deep understanding of technological development. His influential books and extensive research have significantly shaped how we think and engage with technology in our daily lives. It's a privilege to have you on the show, Dr. Feenberg.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Feenberg, you had a talk recently about artificial intelligence. And as you know, our show here is all about discussing the implications of this transformative technology in our lives. So what can you tell our listeners the key points of that talk?
Well, what I mainly wanted to argue in the talk was that we should see artificial intelligence as just the latest in a long line of automated systems that capitalism has developed since the 18th century, 19th century. So in a way, you could say all of our hysteria over AI is actually just because we now, as sort of middle-class bureaucratic members of the society, are now experiencing what craftsmen experienced throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century, as each craft was automated one after another, and people lost their livelihoods to the machines. So now it's up to us. It's finally reached us. So what I wanted to write about in this talk, what I wanted to explain was that we should not see artificial intelligence as something entirely new, but rather as just the latest version of something that's been going on now for a couple hundred years. And so that was the main purpose of the talk. But I also wanted to argue that we don't have to suffer the same fate that craftsmen suffered in the 19th century. And I used some examples from a text by Marx, where he talked about the possible future of industrial society, in which the workers would no longer be simply part of the machinery, but would be controlling the machinery. And that gives us an alternative. I didn't argue that we should all become Marxists, but rather simply, here's a utopia that was developed that is actually now quite relevant to our situation.
Right. So are you optimistic or pessimistic? So is your views on the automation, the ongoing automation, is leading us to trouble, or is leading us to, there's more things that are going to be offloaded to the machines, which means that we will have more time to explore, leisure, have better quality of life, take care more of our health, and have the government figure out a way that we can be still generate income somehow, like the universal income or something like that?
Well, what is disturbing about the present situation is the fetishism of the computer. The notion that somehow the computer is smarter than us. Or if it isn't yet, it will be very soon. And this is silly, but it is very widespread view, and lots of very influential people talk about this and make people scared. The reality, I think, I'm not the final expert on AI. I'm barely competent, but let me just say what I think. From my experience with computers and with a lot of technical work that I've done, I think it's very unlikely that automation, that the AI will actually succeed in completely automating most tasks. It will succeed perhaps in things that are completely routine, but other things will require always some human being to come in and take the material that the automated system provides, that AI provides, and go over it and figure out where the mistakes are and how to fix it. And I'm give you the example of translation, because this is something that I know something about. DeepL is a good translator. You can get an excellent first draft with it, and presumably it'll get better. But it seems implausible that it will actually succeed in successfully translating without any human help texts like literary texts, texts that involve creativity, that involve complicated concepts. It seems like what will happen is much more that translators will still be required, but they will work from a draft provided by the AI, and they'll then fix it. And perhaps they'll be fixing it less in the future, but I do not believe that you'll be able to just hand it over to the AI. Now, we have examples of people handing over computer stuff to without any human intervention, and in some cases, it's been disastrous. So, for example, right now, there's a huge scandal in Britain. Hundreds of post office officials were imprisoned and charged huge fines because the computer system that the post office introduced indicated that they had stolen money. And it was a mistake. The system was mistaken. And now, many years later, many of these people have died already. They're beginning to face the music, right? But they screwed up. And hundreds of people's lives were destroyed by relying on computers without any common sense. And I think the lack of common sense is a real problem. There have been other examples that I could, but I'll just stop with that one because it's so, it's in the news right now. So I think that there's a lot of hype around AI. This is necessary in order to get money, venture capitalists to pour money in. But I think it will, like a lot of other things that have been hyped, will cool off and we'll find it very useful, and we'll also screw up, pretending that it can do things it can't do, and life will go on.
But Dr. Feenberg, a lot of the tasks that you mentioned are irreversible. Like, for example, when a bank decides whether to give somebody a loan or not. Mm-hmm. So the AI here is crunching billions of data points on people to define a pattern where they will identify that this is the risk. And even I've interviewed AI researchers who have called these AI systems as black boxes, as there's no, they don't know mechanistically how the algorithm came up with the conclusion that to give somebody a loan or not. So they cannot go deep inside and see like, how did that happen? However, there's no going back. So banks are not going back to the traditional way of deciding who gets a loan. In the career, we see that in the job applications, AI is filtering all these resumes. We are seeing this in dating, for example, with these dating apps matching people together based on that algorithm. So there's no going back to the train of technology is already, moving forward, and it's hard to stop and say, so what I'm trying to say is that the automations of a lot of cognitive tasks that we human do is already getting automated every day.
Yes. And I mean, in the case of translation, the correct way to handle that is to do more translating, because either to do more translating or to spend less money on translating, because you have now the possibility of a single translator operating many texts quickly, rather than being forced to do that first draft by themselves and taking a lot of time at it. Now you can go faster, but that doesn't mean you stop translating. Now, I don't know about banks. If banks want to surrender everything to an automated system, we'll see what happens. But my guess is that they will quickly discover that there are problems, that you need to have somebody to vet the system, even though you can't, perhaps the black box is a problem. Maybe that will, though, be seen as something that needs to be taken care of, that we need to find out more about how the systems work. Perhaps that's a technical task that could be worked out by programmers. So, but I suspect that it will not be possible to completely surrender loans to automated systems. But, maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. But it seems more likely that loan officers will be able to rely on the systems for the most part, and will nevertheless be asked by the bank to look it over and, make their own judgment about. My father was a nuclear physicist, and I remember eventually he got money from the government to do calculations with a computer. And so he was doing huge calculations. But he always tried to work out an approximation of the calculation. His idea was, sure, the computer is going to almost certainly do a good job, but I want to be sure. And if I make a good approximation, which is, of course, much simpler than the actual calculation, I can get a sense of whether the computer is actually doing the right job. And I guess maybe my view of AI is influenced by my childhood, because I think of it as something that will, for the most part, work like that, rather than total automation, and there, there's plenty of precedent for this. The machine tool systems that were developed in the 1960s and 70s were supposed to eliminate the workers. But it turned out that you couldn't, because there were too many little glitches, too many things that the engineering drawings did not exactly they didn't exactly correspond with the materials that were being used. And so you still needed workers, just fewer. And that seems to me like a good model to take into account in thinking about how we're going to live with AI. Now, of course, there'll be fewer jobs in banks if, in fact, all they're doing is vetting what the computer does. Same thing with translation, perhaps. So that does suggest the need for very different social systems. But, the way the world works right now, that doesn't seem likely. People will be dumped, and it'll be terrible.
So when it comes to, I just want to press more on that automation part before moving on to other areas of interest. Let's say, for example, all of these companies, they are developing these AI systems,
mm-hmm.
and clearly their goal, they announced it themselves that they want to create an AGI. And a lot of the AGI is, the definitions of AGI vary, of course, but mainly it's an agent. It's an agent that can perform tasks. They always compare it to a graduate, a university graduate who is an intern or a trainee who you will hire, and you will give, you'll train them on your company, and they will perform tasks. And in one of your lectures, I believe somebody asked you about AI, and you mentioned something about causal versus symbolic agency. Do you think that where AI is now and where it's heading is different than previous other technologies?
Well, in a way, yes, it is different because it imitates symbolic action. That's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that question. But I don't think that AI actually knows things. I don't believe that it is that it has intelligence in the way we understand intelligence. That's something very complicated that we don't fully understand. We're still trying to understand the brain and cognition, and we're a long way from solving the problems. And AI imitates certain things that we do. But then, many automated systems imitate some aspect of our action, but they are functionally causal. That's even though now in this case, the functionality has the form of a symbolic system. So it looks like the AI is thinking, but in fact, it is a causal. It's purely causal, and that is inspiring to people. It's exciting, and they are even willing to I was asked to work on an article for a journal by somebody who had decided that you could use AI for psychotherapy. So, of course, ChatGPT could be your therapist, right? And straighten you out. Although there are some problems with that. Apparently it hallucinates occasionally, which is not a good thing in a therapist. It's okay in the patient, but not the therapist. So it does have this fascination about it. But I think ultimately it is a causal system. It's not doing what we do when we generate meaning through our actions and words. And let me point out one other thing that I talked about in that speech that you heard. And that is the significance of our own internalization of the things we do, even things that are quite automatic. In doing them, we change ourselves. The AI does not change itself by doing things. It just accumulates data and puts it together. But we actually change. We become the person we are through, for the most part, rather mundane, automatic things. You can see children, for example, busy doing little things that you could easily get a technology that would substitute for the kid's work at play. And then the kid would become what? Be destroyed, because it has to do those things in order to become a human being. And so what we think of as automatic, right, when in the world of, say, building automobiles is one thing, but when it's about the development of the human being, it's something very different. It's much more complicated, and it's not substitutable.
The argument on the other side, though, is that when they build these neural networks, even the terminology they used, I think you mentioned that as well, that they use the same terminology as the human terminologies. But they are building these neural networks that literally mimics how the brain works in a way. And since you said that even we don't understand how intelligence in our brain works, why are we ruling out completely that these systems could be intelligent in the way we are and potentially become, conscious entities?
Well, I mean, I guess you can do it if you want. You can pretend if you want, but it just seems to me very implausible. But then, it's obviously a question. There's no one knows really exactly what will come of the development of AI. And we don't know, of course, what further systems will be added on to what we've got already. But personally, I just think it's not plausible that we will, the sort of thing that takes place in the development of the algorithm could somehow generate what we think of as intelligence. I just don't believe it.
So what we agree on is that automation is going to take some jobs, maybe not a lot, but for example, those people who, let's say the Uber drivers, let's say we are very close into a self-driving cars, and then those people who rely their livelihood on driving cars or trucks, and they lose their livelihood, and then multiply that with other sectors. What meaning of life could we, like if someone lost their job to machinery, what could they do to continue being an active member of society and feeling fulfilled and satisfied in their lives?
Well, this is, of course, not new. Right? This has been going on since the 19th century. The loss of craft work has been going on for a couple hundred years. And now, as I said earlier, it now becomes really a big deal for us because we're the kind of people who might get offed. Whereas, when it was people who were making clothes, forget it. Who cares? Right now, I think our society is not designed to deal with this problem. And the result, we know the result from, for example, what happened to coal miners in West Virginia and to many other people who lost their jobs through changes in technology. And mostly they're screwed. I mean, that's just the way the system works. Meanwhile, the big shots get the billions, and and everyone seems to think that's the way it should be. And as long as people think that, there'll be very bad consequences from AI. The solution would have to be a fundamental change in the society. And that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. In fact, we're going backward. So I'm rather worried about what the future holds. We can't even deal with climate change, which is, that's pretty obvious that you've got to do something about it, huh? In the old days, the businessmen seemed to know how to respond to problems. They built great systems like the highway system of America, the Tennessee Valley Authority. They did what was necessary to make the society work. But they don't seem interested anymore. They want to go to Mars, or build some island in the Pacific where they can escape from taxes. These people are not doing the job. And that's just the fact. So my concern is that we're going to have a lot of difficulty.
Yeah. And, a lot of people who criticize Elon Musk about like saying, hey, you want to take us to Mars, but there's a lot of problems on Earth. And what are you doing about them? I mean, but yeah, it's interesting for me because, I had somebody on the show earlier, not today, but like in the last month or so. And I haven't published the episode yet, but he was talking about the mystery, like the milestone of language, the acquisition of language that humans managed to get is a catalyst for so many things of what we call right now intelligence. Like imagine if we don't have language, do you think we're going to be as smart as we are right now?
Oh, no.
So the problem with the latest AI systems are language-based. So they are, so for an ChatGPT to answer a thoughtful question, it has to master language in a way that is not like it's not superficial anymore. These systems have become more like they call them reasoning and engines and predictive engines. And so if a system masters language, so how does it still be far from being human level?
Well, they've discovered that whales are sending all kinds of complicated signals to each other. So they figured maybe we can use AI to find out what the whales are saying to each other. It'd probably be very interesting. I'd like to know. Yeah, of course, maybe you can, as a sort of first approximation, argue that what AIs are doing is language, as we understand language. But I don't think that that is really what you would ultimately want to end up with. It's a first approximation because it looks like it, but that doesn't mean it is it. The way in which it produces what we think of as language is so different from our own way of handling language that it's not plausible. At least to me, it is not plausible that it is actually doing the same thing, just, with a slightly different technical base. I don't think it is really doing what we do when we use language. But it is very, what do you say, seductive, right? To think of it as the sort of thing we do because it looks so similar. But Wiesenbaum made a little chatbot in the I think it was in the 1960s or 70s at MIT.
Elisa.
Yeah, and people were fascinated by it. They actually thought they were talking to an AI. And this is like, it was not. This was at a time when it was difficult to get a computer to win at chess. I mean, at checkers, not chess, but checkers. So it was a really primitive device, but it worked for people as a symbol, a kind of a. So there's hope in people. For a friend of mine was just here who is a famous scholar of cinema, and he explained to me that when the first recordings were made, and these recordings, remember, were made not with electronics, but just with a big horn, right? People thought they sounded just like real. And then when they managed to get some electronics into it and they had, 78 records, people thought, wow, it's so good. It's so much like real. So, I mean, there is a kind of willingness on the part of human beings to be seduced by anything that resembles us, that does what we do. And I think AI is.
Sorry to cut you. Noam Chomsky's idea of biological endowment, is this something that you personally believe in?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't followed Chomsky's latest, so I'm not sure if I understand from what I learned about his work when I was younger. He thought that the syntax, the formal syntax, was somehow embedded in the neural structure of the brain, and that's quite plausible. And it has all kinds of consequences, not just language, but music, mathematics, all sorts of things are possible because the brain has this strange property that allows it to produce language. And most of those, I mean, it's quite an interesting subject. Most of those properties were not exploited by human beings for the first, 400,000 years. But now we're pretty good at finding these things, finding out what we can do with our brain.
Do you think AI is going to help in scientific exploration, in discovery of the mysteries of the universe, in understanding, why we're here and how, the purpose of life and all of these big questions?
Not really.
No.
I'm sure that AI will be used by scientists and will have wonderful uses. Perhaps in medicine, very soon we'll discover things that are extremely useful for protecting ourselves from disease. But that's not the same thing as figuring out the meaning of life. I'm afraid that we have to do that ourselves. We can't. No machine can help us.
Are you hopeful? Because honestly, that this topic has been, I don't know, maybe it's this age, I'm approaching 40 and I start thinking more about these things, the mysteries, like how all this happened. Do you think, is it beyond our cognitive ability to reach into understanding and putting all the pieces together? Is it like what they talk about, the cognitive bottleneck? There's like the rats, I believe, they solve mazes, but they cannot understand prime numbers, and it's kind of like a cognitive block they have. Do you think we humans, we have this kind of cognitive block that we cannot reach beyond and understand like more deeply on what's happening in the universe and how did we come about and why we woke up and start having discussions like these?
Actually, I think that we are an accident. So there's nothing in the past that can explain what we have become. And we are making ourselves, ever since people started using language and tools, we've been making ourselves what we have become. And we can become ever more something ever different in the future. And we have now a society that is very, very much involved with what is called in philosophy analytic rationality. We think in terms of quasi-scientific ideas, rules, regulations. We have lost a lot of capacities that people had in earlier times, but we've gained this fantastic ability to operate with analytic understanding. But we still are able to think in other ways. We can think, for example, about right and wrong, which doesn't really work in the scientific method. We can think about the meaning of our own lives, what we want to make of our lives. We can, so we still have capacities that used to be the main thing that people did as rational beings. We still have these capacities. They're just not the ones that get you into MIT. So I think, we need to work on this. This is philosophy, right? Everybody should have a philosophy. They should be beyond simply facts and information. They should be beyond that and be able to think about meanings. And so I think philosophy is still important, even though it's been marginalized by
mainstream science.
Society, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I developed this fascination with philosophy, and I can't stop thinking about it. Now I've decided to go back to school, although I just finished my master's degree in information systems. And I thought I'm going to have a career in industry. And now I thought that, philosophy is very important to me. And I appreciate that, and it's kind of like fulfilling to me to really think. And although I'm a very junior, and it's such an honor to speak to a figure like yourself. And lately I've been, thinking more about this consciousness, this awakening that we have. So I read a book by Christoph Koch called The Feeling of Life Itself. And he talks a lot about the integrated information theory, whereby an organism, there's like a threshold when they develop a certain level of complexity and integration in their information circuitry, they kind of give rise to consciousness, right? And then I was like, okay, I mean, that makes sense. And then I read another book called Conscious by Annika Harris. She was talking about panpsychism, whereby it might be that consciousness is a fundamental part of everything. It's part of the universe, part of the rocks and the and I think a famous joke about panpsychism is that the spoon is conscious or something like that. But I think this is simplifying. But what she's talking about is that there's a spectrum of consciousness that is embedded in everything. And that's the only explanation why we have this high level of consciousness, but doesn't mean that, other matter doesn't have consciousness at all. Do you think about these things? I know it's out of your area of focus, but do you happen to think about these things?
Well, I have. It's a little complicated to talk about. I mean, we operate in different ways in the world. In one way, we are dealing with facts and physical objects in their natural state. And in another way, we are conscious of what we're doing. We're not just out there on the world. We're in ourselves. I think this lived experience that we have, this direct experience that we have, is something that is special. It gives us a way of thinking about reality that's different from the world of facts. It's not that the facts aren't there. It's just that we need to approach them through the meanings that we give them, through the experience that we have of them. If we approach the facts in that way, we have a very different sense of reality from our everyday notion of reality. And that is, for me, the key idea through which we can begin to make some sense of what's going on with us as human beings with consciousness. But this is very different from the idea that within the facts themselves, there is consciousness. I don't really see that. That seems implausible. I'm too much. I believe that science really works. It gives us a lot of information. It's a good thing. We're not going to overrun it with a new philosophy. What we need is a philosophy that goes around it in a sense, that enables us to understand the world from a different angle, not from the angle of facts, but from the angle of meaning, of the meanings that we attribute to the world. And that's a complicated alternative to the dominant culture in our society, which is, a factual culture. But that's where philosophy can really, I think, help us to move beyond a simple-minded view of the world as just a bunch of things.
My final question to you, Dr. Feenberg, is about what I'm doing in this podcast. I mentioned during our communication that I am developing more and more interest in the philosophy of technology as a brand to pursue it more. In terms of this podcast as a way to communicate and talk and discuss about areas in the philosophy of technology, what advice do you have for me?
Oh, dear. I think there is a society for philosophy and technology. And there are a lot of people involved in that who have interesting things to say. So I guess my idea would be look up some of those people and see the ones who interest you, and you can probably get them to talk, like me. And that would widen your understanding of the problem. In other words, I guess it's also interesting to read the things that come out in popular books. There are good things written by people for general readers, but there are also people with technical expertise in philosophy of technology, and it'd be good to find out something from what they have to say too.
Absolutely. I started my my philosophy degree this summer, so I know it's a long journey ahead of me, but there's always have to start somewhere. Dr. Feenberg,
congratulations.
Thank you. Dr. Feenberg, it's an honor to have you. Thank you for entertaining a humble person like me to talk on this humble show. So I appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.